Hello, my name is Paul Glumaz. I'm involved in the political movement of Lyndon LaRouche, going on now 45 years. And I welcome you to this first day of spring, March 20th, 2018. And it is a glorious spring we are going to have, I think. And we have seen some very incredible things developing. Um, the prime ministership of Great Britain, headed by the uh, woman who some say is an accidental prime minister. Uh, some say she's trying to be like Margaret Thatcher, Theresa May, and her uh, foreign minister, Boris Johnson, have gone absolutely berserk, claiming that Russia has attacked Great Britain, using nerve agents against former spies, and that an ultimatum was given to Russia, and it was demanded that all of the freedom-loving countries of the world, including the United States, France, and Germany, and come to the rally around the British who are being attacked by Vladimir Putin. And she did this in the Parliament, and it's just she's basically demanding that the U.S. declare increased hostility towards Russia. And sitting in the Parliament in the opposition was the head of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. And his response was, show the proof. Have you followed the guidelines of the chemical warfare agreements of the monitoring agency? Have you given the samples to the Russians? Have you, etc. And she went berserk, and then later he said that the last time this happened, it was the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein could put together within 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever. This was the thing that British intelligence used to get the U.S. to go into Iraq. The U.S. was divided. The U.S. was not. It was not clear that the U.S. was going to go into Iraq. Bush Sr., Colin Powell, and others were opposed. Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld were in favor. It was Tony Blair and the product of British intelligence, which at that time was being run by Sir Richard Dearlove, that essentially convinced or turned the tide towards an invasion of Iraq. So Jeremy Putin, the head of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, the head of the Labour Party, said this happened before. We need to have these allegations substantiated, and the press, the tabloid press in London went berserk the next day, calling Jeremy Corbyn a Kremlin stooge, calling him an agent of Vladimir Putin. This is all over the British tabloid press. Now you have to understand that this guy Corbyn, who heads the Labour Party and has incredible respect within the working population of Great Britain, is refusing to buckle under to this to the warmongering, scare-threatening tactics. And the whole thing is an exercise of raw power. We say it is. We're not going to prove to you that it is. We're not going to demonstrate that it is. We're not going to show you how we know. We say it is, and it is. And all of the assets of the British Empire in the United States, in the world, have been mobilized to demand to attack, the demand that the West attack Russia, attack them for their, and now Boris Johnson, the secretary, the foreign minister, is saying that Russia has plans to attack the nuclear facilities through cyber warfare, and he's outlining all these scenarios of what Russia's planning to do, what Putin is planning to do. This is totally out psychotic. This guy that Skripal, the Colonel Skripal, was recruited in Russia in the middle '90s under the guidance of the station chief there for British intelligence, who was none other than Christopher Steele, by a guy by the name of Pablo Miller. Now, Pablo Miller later turns up as living in the same neighborhood as this guy, and he was working for a private intelligence organization called Orbis, which was founded by Christopher Steele after Christopher Steele left the MI6. But the entire situation, okay, now you got to get a sense of this. Christopher Steele sets up Orbis. Now, Orbis is an private intelligence service. Since it was set up in the last, I think, 6 years or so, it has contracted $200 million worth of business. This is a private intelligence agency contracting 200. So where is all this money coming from? Well, who are they doing research for? That's paying all this money. Well, it turns out that they're doing research for Russian oligarchs and their criminal gangs, which is a whole issue of still a problem in Russia, that you have the leftovers of these oligarchs who haven't been cleaned up, and they're involved in all kinds of activities. And this is who Orbis is connected to. But this is also a way to run intelligence inside Russia through criminal gangs. Now, Christopher Steele was also in this period, or at least about 10 years ago or so, 11, 12 years ago, he became very involved with the Justice Department Eurasian Crime Task Force, which is connected into the same apparatus. So you have the same Richard Dearlove and Christopher Steele who were involved in putting the dossier together that led to the war in Iraq, directly involved in this whole situation. And it turns out that the guy who turned Colonel Skripal worked for Steele's organization, and as far as we can tell, there was no issue between the Russian and this guy. So why he was singled out, we don't even know if this substance Novichok exists. There's no evidence that some dissident Russian chemist has put out the equations, but nobody has seen a sample of this nerve agent to compare it to. So the whole thing is really shot full of whatever. So, but you have this network that was involved in the last. Now, it turns out that Christopher Steele with British intelligence, began the whole Russian intervention into the Western elections. They ran it on Marie Le Pen. They ran it on Berlusconi, and then they began to run it on Trump. But all of this goes back to 2014. So all the propaganda for Russia's intervening into the elections, they're paying right-wing groups, they're doing all of this. It goes back to about 2014. Well, that's at the time that the Ukraine situation occurs. So there's a total turning point politically, because they were expecting Yanukovych, the president of the Ukraine, to hand the Ukraine over economically to the European Union, and when he reneged on that, that's when all the hell broke loose in Ukraine. They were planning to do the demonstrations in the Maidan. They were planning to do that in March of 2015 when there was a scheduled election. Instead, they did it a year earlier, and they did it, and they brought down the Ukrainian government, and in a very violent coup that was backed by the West. But ever since then, the line has been that Putin is out to affect the elections. You know, Brexit was caused by Putin's influence. The Italian elections was caused by Putin's influence, and of course, the U.S. elections was influenced by Putin. So this has been the line that's been put out ever since, and the line did not come initially from within the U.S. government. It came from British intelligence. It came from the kindergarten of Sir Richard Dearlove, who probably is still the case officer for for Christopher Steele. And there are all these books coming out defending Christopher Steele as if he's some great intelligence genius appearing in the press. You know, there's like 3 books that have come out. So they're not trying to. The British aren't vilifying him. They're actually presenting him as the real thing, and that there's legitimacy to the dossier. So often when you get into a battle or a war, and as the war expands, your opponent opens up flanks, and these are flanks that are now opening up, because very few people really understood, and still very few people understand the role of the British in all of this. And so now it's opening up. You can start to see the role of the British directly. They're the ones taking the charge against Russia. And of course, Donald Trump was induced to kind of go along with a relatively watered down version of a denunciation of Russia, not the strength of the document that the British wanted. However, Donald Trump did call today to congratulate Vladimir Putin on his victory, as did the French president, as did the German chancellor. And he said we need to find a way to stabilize our relationship and work on security issues and stopping terrorism. And then he looks forward to meeting with Putin next month. I think they're going to have a meeting next month. And also, Donald Trump is going to have a meeting with Abe, and then in May he's going to have a meeting with Kim Jong-un. And so this is Trump not really going along with all of this. So you have to get a sense of this. This is awesome. Now you have essentially a profound battle going on between 2 paradigms. The British geopolitical paradigm that the United States has been locked into increasingly since the death of FDR, and the new paradigm that's emerging, based largely on what LaRouche has done over 40 years, but as transformed by the Chinese into a global development perspective. Now, the key to understanding also why this imperial system is totally freaked out is that both Russia and China have decided or have agreed that they're going to go for the most rapid development of scientific knowledge and scientific and technological capabilities, partly for military, but primarily for the civilian economy. That none of this is secret. It needs to be shared with all of humanity. Okay, so this is a commitment by Russia and China. This is huge. Okay, now last time I told you about the developments that the Russians did, the Russians did in new physical principles that now make it impossible for the U.S. to win a nuclear war, for NATO to win a nuclear war. Up until now, many analysts thought it was a possibility. It might be worth going for because of the crisis. But now it will not work. But the second thing that's really profoundly disturbed the establishment is what happened in China. I'm going to backtrack a little bit into a little bit of history. After the chaos of the after the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, Deng Xiaoping came in, and in 1978, Deng Xiaoping began opening up China, and he basically said, you know, what difference does it make if the cat is white or black, as long as it's a good cat, and kills mice. And what that meant is a metaphor is to say what difference whether it's communism or capitalism, as long as it does, you know, it does the job. So from that standpoint, they inspired the entrepreneurial potential of the Chinese to be unleashed. And then there was another formulation that said what's wrong with being rich? It's good to be rich. And so the idea was you go ahead and you develop, you go ahead and you do business, the entrepreneurial spirit, but there's also something in it for you. So essentially, from 1978 to 2012, which is roughly 32 years, when until Xi Jinping became the president, you had this process going on of massive wealth being accumulated by individuals, and then the whole issue of whether they're going to keep the Communist Party or become a social democracy or have a parliamentarian system. All of these things were being debated. And from the standpoint of the West, especially from the British and from the liberal people, they felt that over time, as the Chinese population would become more educated and they would become more economically advanced, that they would tend towards Western liberalism, that they would be open to Western liberalism, and that China would essentially be ultimately absorbed into a global free market world system. And they had ample reason to believe that because of all the billionaires and millionaires that were being created, and also because the party itself had become very corrupt. And also because a lot of the functions of government were not being directed by the party anymore. They were being directed by state organizations and by government organizations. So there was this, and then the way it was set up by Deng Xiaoping, because they didn't want someone to be powerful like Mao, is they had a lot of checks and balances, so that if you made a decision, it had to be vetted through a whole group of people, and there were a lot of factional fighting going on, and it's a tough world, right? You know, and so when Xi Jinping came in, there was a radical change. They massively cleaned up the Communist Party. They moved the Communist Party in as the core institution that's making decisions, a deliberating institution. They transformed. They ended this whole process of they began promoting the popular, you know, the economic development of the population. You know, a dramatic increase in the living standard. It was already occurring, but now it's dramatic. And then what happened in the last few weeks is that the term limits were removed on Xi Jinping. He can now, and he has now consolidated power in China like no one except Mao. And the people who surround him are his people. He has essentially consolidated power. And the reason that the Chinese leadership agreed to this is because they have to move very rapidly towards economic development, towards the Belt and Road. And most of all, they can't have internal dissension. So this eliminates any future possibility of China becoming what the West was hoping that it would be, or what the British and the neoliberal West was, and the U.S. element who were hoping China to be. China's not going to be that way. they're going to have a brute force march towards a super industrialization, space program, everything. And they're going to develop the world, and they're going to involve every part of the world in this global economic development, and it's going to be rigorously carried through. It's not going to be, they're now committed to this policy of the Belt and Road. They're committed to the full development of the planet, and that's the only way they're going to escape from the economic trap that they're in, is to develop the whole world. China isn't going to develop and the rest of the world not develop, because it doesn't work that way. China's too big. China's not Singapore or South Korea. China has 1.4 billion people. If you're going to, you can't. That's a lot of development, and you can't do all of that development without involving and developing the whole world. So this is where China's going, and this is also changing all of the relationships in the world. At the time that Xi Jinping was coming in, China had only two close allies, Pakistan and North Korea, if you could call them that. They didn't have allies. Now all these countries are joining. Most of the world is joining the Belt and Road. So this is also what's freaking them out. There is no military option, and there's no option to change China. You can't wait until Xi Jinping is going to leave office. He could be there for the rest of his life, and this is causing an incredible crisis inside the institutional establishment of the West, especially the British Empire. And the fact that Trump continues to say that Xi Jinping is a good friend of his, that he likes Xi Jinping, that Xi Jinping is somebody he can connect to, can relate to, is also very significant. Because what will emerge eventually is a close working relationship between the United States, China, and Russia, and they're starting to portray Trump as another autocratic figure, like Putin and like Xi Jinping. That he has anti-liberal tendencies, anti-neoliberal tendencies. Well, give me a break. I'm sure he got elected because of that. So this is where the hysteria. Now you have to understand, this is the U.S. establishment as it had emerged after whittling out, the more the older policy people. This is the establishment. This is the consensus of the Washington consensus. This is the establishment that is totally freaking out right now. And the problem you have in the United States is that nobody understands what's going on, and nothing makes any sense to people, because the establishment is in control, but who's in control? And what is the real policy? And Trump doesn't have yet a policy. He has certain impulses, like shutting down the drug trade. He's now talking about the death penalty for drug pushers. He asked Xi Jinping, do you have a drug problem? He says no, and he says, well, why? He says, we use the death penalty. He asked Singapore's president, do you have a drug problem? He says, no, we have the death penalty. So he's talking about the death penalty for drug pushers now. He's starting to mention that. Now that's a very non-liberal thing to be saying. And this is up in New Hampshire, where he had an event on dealing with the opioid crisis, which and then you have the whole situation with tariffs and the departure of Gary Cohn, the head of economic advisors, who's the Goldman Sachs character. So it's not clear how this is all going, but we know one thing, and that is that two of the top congressmen are now calling for, not Paul Ryan, but the two under him, the majority leader in the House and the whip. They're calling for a special counsel on Christopher Steele, Mueller, the FBI, and all of that. So that's very significant. So this thing is starting to, but the British are now, pretty much out in the open now. They've been pretty much smoked out. And the fact that Jeremy Corbyn is not going along means that he could very well soon be the next prime minister of England, and he could finish burying the British Empire and give England, Scotland, and Wales a much better economic future.